Hello and welcome to Squared Loops. I'm Pete. This is part of the Accelerator 1 course. In this session, we're going to be focusing on the web side of things, in particular NodeJs. This video will cover poshifying our Windows terminal. We're going to create a basic web page using HTML and CSS. We will then install NodeJs, which is a web server, as well as many other things. We will create a basic Node.js application that will serve our web page. We will then go on to install Express, which is a Node module, and gives us more enhanced functionality. We will then wrap up, push our code to Git, and get ready for the next module. Let's go. This step is purely optional. We're going to make our terminal look a little bit nicer by installing OhmyPosh, which is a PowerShell module that will display more information about our Git statuses as we go through the various lessons. You can skip this if you're not interested. First of all, we need to run the Windows terminal as an administrator. Right-click Windows Terminal, right-click Windows Terminal again, and then run as administrator. When prompted, if you wish to continue, click Yes. When the terminal appears, run install-module, and the name of the module is OhmyPosh. Windows will now go locate the module from the PowerShell gallery and download that for us. You can see that it's saying we need to install a provider. We can say yes, we'd like to continue with this. This repository is not trusted. Are we sure we want to continue? Yes, we do. And we'll say A so we don't get prompted for every repository. And that is now installed. To load that module into memory, we use a command called import module. And again, we just pass the name that we wish to run. That's now imported, and we can start using the module. The first example is by running get posh themes. This will list all of the themes available from OhmyPosh. At the moment, you can see they look a little strange with squares, and that's because we don't have the correct font installed. We'll go back and install that font shortly and try again. For now, let's set the prompt that we wish to use. We're going to use PowerShell level 10,000 Classic. To do that, we need to use Notepad and open our profile. Like before, we have our chocolatey profile and we're importing the Posh Git module. We simply need to import module OhmyPosh and then set the theme that we wish. We can add a comment here as well. Save and close. We can load our profile with $profile. You can see that the command line has now changed to use the new theme. However, the squares show that we're missing fonts. We can download those fonts now and give us a nicer experience. Using a browser, we will go to this location. The link will be in the description below in the blog. You can go and download it from there. Simply download the file. Browse to it on your computer, and we'll move that somewhere slightly more permanent than the downloads. So we can cut and paste. For now, we'll put it in Tools. This could be anywhere. right-click, install for all users, so that anyone using this machine can access the font. It's installing now, completed successfully. Returning to our terminal, we need to change the terminal to use that font. Click the drop-down arrow, click Settings. On the left-hand side, select Base Layer. This applies to all terminals, not just PowerShell. And then Appearance tab. The current font face is Cascadia. Replace that with the new font we've downloaded, Cascadia Cove NF. Click the Save button to save those changes, and then press the X to close. You can now see the terminal has updated instantly. We have a Windows to show we're in a Windows terminal. The lightning bolt shows that we're running as an administrator, and we're not in the Git repository. On the right, it shows the user currently signed in, the machine name, and the current time. This is useful when running long operations that may take a long time and you're not sure how long it took if you went away for a coffee. You can come back and see the time difference between commands. It's quite a useful feature. We can now exit the terminal, and the next time we run the terminal, it will automatically load OhmyPosh as part of our profile and will always appear like this. That's true for PowerShell. In other shells, such as Bash, that may not happen, but we can cover that in another subject. So we can close this terminal with exit and close the windows we've opened. We don't need these for now. Okay, we're now ready for the rest of the course. The first thing we'll do is to create a GitHub repository so that we can store our code as we go through the tutorials. Browse to github.com and then sign in with the account you created earlier in the course. Browse to your repositories and create a new repository. We'll call this Hello World NodeJS. We can give this a simple description. You can make this public or private, as discussed before. For this tutorial, I'll leave it public so that people can access the code as part of the course. It's always worth adding a README if nothing else, as a nice placeholder file that we can edit. By doing so, we will also create the main default branch. Create that repository now. When the repository has been created, click on the green code button and then the notepad to copy the clone address. Open terminal. We will then change to our Git folder that we created earlier and run the git clone command, pasting in the URL of our new repo. If we change that directory, you will see that the address bar has now changed, showing we're on the main branch. We can now jump straight into that with code. The README file that we created when we created the repository is visible here and showing we're on the main branch. We're going to start by creating a simple web page, and then we will build on top of that to show how Node.js can be used. To create a file, you can either click the little icon on the Explorer window or right-click New File. We'll call this file index.htm. That stands for Hypertext Markup, and it's part of the Hypertext Markup language where we can put content for our website. Again, in this Accelerator course, we're only going to touch on just enough information So we'll go through this quite quickly and then come back in another session to go into more detail around HTML, CSS, JavaScript, things like that. For now though, you can just follow along and either copy paste from the blog or just watch the video for now. The first line we're going to paste in here is a document type, and what this does is tells the browser that it's an HTML page and therefore to render it as a web page. The next element we'll add is HTML. That tells the page that everything between these two items will make up our web page. You can see that as I type, Visual Studio Code is already adding the closing elements for me. At this point, we can take a few shortcuts and just type hello world and save. That should be enough for the browser to be able to show the page. You can right click and you can view in various different ways here. So we could open straight with the browser. We could reveal in File Explorer. We'll do that for now just so that we can show how this would work. Here's our file. By double clicking it, this will load in the default browser, which is Edge on this machine, and displays hello world. Not the most exciting content, but it renders okay. That's the default font for this browser and doesn't look massively inspiring, but it's a good start. Going back to Visual Studio Code, we can start to do a little more with this content. There are some default elements within HTML that we can use to style the page. One of them is a header, H1 being the top main header, and H2, 3, 4, and so on as descending headers. We'll make our header read hello world. And then underneath that, we'll create a paragraph, P for paragraph. And we can add some simple content in here. We can also, within a paragraph, embed some links. A link or an anchor is signified by the A attribute. href is the reference we would like to load. And we'll add a target which will allow us to open in a blank page rather than browse away from the page we're looking at. Between the A elements will be the text that you would see as a user. So, having added some simple content, we can go back to our browser, click the refresh symbol or F5, and you'll see the page is now reloaded with a header, some simple content, and even a simple link that will take us to another page. Doesn't look very inspiring, doesn't look very well formatted, so we can start to embellish this page a little. One of the things we will change is we will add a head. And what this section does is to allow us to add more metadata or attributes to the page that the browser will process, but the user won't. When we have a head, best practice is to have a body as well. We'll move our content into the body. One of the first elements we'll add in our head is the title. At the moment, if we view the page again, the title is just index.htm. Doesn't look very attractive. We can change that to hello world NodeJs. Save that. Refresh. And now our browser tab already looks much better. The other thing we would have in the header are styles. This will be covered in more detail in another session. There are many websites out there if you'd like to jump straight into CSS, cascading style sheets. Normally we would have a separate file containing all of our lovely styling and graphics. For now, for simplicity, we're just going to put it straight into this one file so it's all self-contained and we can just read it slightly easier. So I'm going to paste some code in here and quickly run through it. The star means apply to everything. HTML is obviously the main element itself, and this is just adding some widths and heights just to help center some content we're going to create. The body is the main content that we're going to render to the user, so filling up the full space within the HTML element itself. So the height is only 60% of the browser screen, and the body will fill 100% of that 60%, and that's relative. Background color, you can use red, green, blue values, RGBs here. Won't go into too much detail there, but Visual Studio Code quite nicely gives you a preview box and some nice editors to help you select colors. We're going to center our content, and we're going to set some colors and fonts for the main piece of the website here. We want our anchors, our links to be white, our header to be white and large 64 pixel font, and the paragraph to be 32 size font. For this to work, we need to change our body slightly to put it inside a divider, a div. And here we can set the class to center, which is this style here. And move our div down and then align everything nicely. You don't need to align in HTML. It's not aware of spaces. It just makes it easier for the developer to read if things are nicely organized. Visual Studio Code also gives you some nice helpers with drop downs where you can collapse elements. For example, if we weren't interested in the head, we could collapse the head and just expand on the body, just to help us to see what we're working with rather than all of the code, which may be overwhelming. For now, though, I'll expand everything just so that we can see the entire file. It's only 52 lines, even with all of this extra spacing in here. We can save that file and go back to our browser with a refresh. You can now see already that's looking a lot better. Looks a bit more colorful, starts to get some of the squared loops colors going, and you can see how with a very little amount of work you can start to create a page that looks a bit more interactive and engaging. We'll just tweak this slightly to remove some spaces and to tidy it up a little bit more. Rather than multiple paragraphs, we can add what's called a break. What that will do is adds a line break, but without the big padding that we would see before. If we save that, and let's add an exclamation mark as well at the end because this is quite exciting stuff. And refresh again. There, that's looking better now. Also shows that the link is white, but everything before and after is orange. I think that's looking good. So at this point, a lot of tutorials would go into detail on how you can add more styles and content, and that's brilliant. We're not going to do that on this course though. This is a zero to hero, and we'll come back on future courses to add in the details. One of the things that a lot of courses will miss is that while this looks very good, you can see on my address bar, it's actually just using the file straight from my computer. Now that works okay for me, but no one else can view this file. It's only visible on my machine using this exact path. What I'm going to do now is swap over to another machine that I have on the same network and try and access this folder and see what happens. Okay, here's my other computer. If I paste in you'll see that it cannot find the file. And that's because this machine cannot talk directly to this machine using files. So we're going to have to find some way of hosting this website. Now, we're going to use NodeJs for this simple example. NodeJs is a much more powerful engine than just a web server. It can do lots of back-end computations and APIs and all sorts of clever things. Again, we'll touch in future lessons. For now, though, we're going to use it just to serve up this web page, and then we can come back in future sessions and use the setup we've used. So, first thing we'll do is exit our normal terminal, and we will launch an administrated terminal with right-click terminal, run as administrator. Once we're in here, we can run choco install Node.js, and yes, we'd like to install. Okay, as before, we need to refresh our environments to make sure we can pick up the new changes that have just been installed. Okay, now that has worked, we can try and check out Node.js. We can do that by running node -v. It shows Node 15.14 has just been installed. Your version may be different, that is absolutely fine. Part of the Node.js ecosystem is Node Package Manager, or NPM. This allows us to work with other third-party libraries and modules. We'll check that's installed and working correctly as well. Yep, so that's also returned a version saying there's a later version available, but we can skip that for now. If you get both of those versions appearing correctly, then you're doing well, and we can crack on. So we will return to our project, create a new file. We'll call this app.js for JavaScript. Node.js is a JavaScript engine. I will paste a sample application on here and run through. This is a very basic Node.js application. Require or bring an HTTP module, and that will allow us to use this as a web server. The host name is a special code, special IP address 127.0.0.1, otherwise known as home or local host. And that will mean that this runs on the local machine. The port is 8080. This can be any port within a certain range, and it's just a way of identifying what port or what address are we listening on. We may be running various Node.js applications or other web applications. They all need a unique port. You can't have two applications on the same port. Then, using the HTTP module we imported, we'll create a server, listening for requests and sending responses. For now, we're going to respond with a static canned response, which is a status code 200, which is OK, some plain text, and it will contain hello world Node.js. Then we start listening on port 8080 on our local host, and when it starts, we'll just output that the server is running and the address so that we can easily browse to it. We will view the terminal now so that we can run this more easily rather than going backwards and forwards between our terminal and our Visual Studio Code. Now you can see here that the output looks a little strange, and that's because I've forgotten to update my fonts as we did with the terminal and my posh, so I can quickly fix that up now. I just need to go into File, Preferences, Settings. Let's close the terminal a second for more screen space. Features, Terminal, scroll down and find the font. Font family. We will paste in our new font, Cascading Cove NF. Control S to save and close that. If we pop up the console now, there we go. Looking much better. And you can see here that it's showing that we've got several files have changed. 2 files have changed, and indeed 2 files have changed. I'm also going to zoom in slightly, make this easier for everybody to see, and then clear. Okay. So we can now run our application with Node and then the name of the application. So the term Node is not recognized, and that's because we had Visual Studio running when we installed NodeJs. So we would need to run our refresh environment here as well. We could exit Visual Studio and come back in, but for now, quick and easy, we can just refresh. Let's try that again. There we go, that's better. So this time it's running, and it's showing that the server is running on localhost port 8080. Visual Studio Code even gives us a nice little link. We can press Control on the keyboard and click. That will launch in the browser. 127.0.0.1 port 8080 does indeed show us our Hello World Node.js. Now, this machine has a friendly name, which we can access with an environment variable called computer name, called squared loops. You may have also noticed, I mentioned earlier, the name of the machine is also in my terminal prompt here, squared loops. We can find out more information about the machine with ipconfig. Shows that it's on the mshome.net network, and it has various IP addresses. IP addresses are just ways of identifying the machine. So we could use either the IP address of the machine or the friendly name. For now, we're going to use the friendly name as it's easier to remember and more like how we would use the internet. If I go back to my other computer now, still cannot find the file. But if I go to the machine, squaredloops.mshome.net on port 8080, okay. Now the reason for this is that we are explicitly listening on this local host address here, 127.0.0.1. If we press Ctrl C to stop running and change the host name here to 0.0.0.0, that means listen on all of the machine. Don't listen on just one IP address. If we run that again, we get the same prompt, and we can go to our local host, refresh that, and we still get our Hello World Node.js. If we go here and type the machine name, squaredloops.mshome.net, and of course the port 8080. We get the hello world Node.js. And if we go back to our other computer and try, then hopefully this will load this time. No. So 8080, as I mentioned, is not a default port. So I was talking about the firewall. I misspoke there. We need to add a firewall rule. We can do that now. Let's run firewall. And we will go into the advanced settings. So all on, which is good. We want to keep it that way. Yes, we do want to proceed. Let's pop that down here. So we want to look at inbound rules. The many defaults here we have echo, for example, which is used for pinging, network discovery, all sorts of default rules. We'll add our own new rule here. We want to use a port. Next, TCP is the HTTP underlying protocol, so we leave that as TCP, and we're going to limit it to just our one port for security reasons. Keep it as limited as you can. Next, we'll allow all connections. We don't need to worry about security at this point on our local network, but HTTP is fine for this demo. We only want to apply it to our private network. If we ever swapped onto a public network, then this rule would be rejected and people wouldn't be able to access the site. We will call this hello world Node.js and finish. We can search that in the list. You see it has a green allow icon. If we go back now and try refreshing, there we go. It's now loaded on our other machine. Not secure, as we know, that's just coming straight through on HTTP, and we'll fix that later on. But we are now accessing the website from our Node.js application, hosting a simple canned response. But one machine can now talk to another machine, so we're on our journey to a proper website that we can use, not just on our single machine. So I'm going to close that for now and close our firewall rules. Still working on this box as well. Let's close the local host, and we'll use this squared loops MS home. That's called a fully qualified domain name, or FQDN. And we'll use that everywhere just so that we don't have to remember where we're running this from now on. It will always be the same. Let's minimize that. Back to here. We'll press Control-C to stop running Node.js. If we go and refresh the pages, they will now fail because there's no Node.js running, nothing to serve the website, and the same will happen on our remote computer as well. If we go here, the same response will time out. We'll leave that to timeout, don't need to watch that. Okay, and just close our terminal here. So now what we're going to do is prepare this as a proper application, and we're going to install a Node package called Express, which will allow us to do some slightly more clever things than serve this static hello world constant text here. So jumping back to our terminal, we can clear that. What we can do is run npm init, and that will initialize this current folder to be a proper Node application. So it will go off and install various files for us. You can see here it's asking us what is the package name, and it gives us a default based on what we're doing. That's the repo name, so we'll say yes, we'll continue with the default. What's the version number of our application? Version 1.0.0 is fine. And a description, so we can enter a simple description here. Simple hello world Node.js app. What's the entry point? Again, it's a sensible default here. We've got an application called app.js, so we'll just press enter. And the test command. Now, we will just skip this with enter for now. We'll come back to what a test command is and what's the repository. So it's picked up our Git information. We'll press enter to continue with that. Keywords, we can skip that, not important. Author, this is where you would give your information. So squared loops for me. And what is the license? We're going to go with an MIT license. You can find out more Googling all of that. And then it will list out the configuration it's going to use. Is this okay? Yes, it is. Off it goes. What it's done now is you'll see that there's an additional file created called package.json. Let me close the terminal. It lists information about the name, the description, the application it will launch. What are the tests? So at the moment, we don't have any tests specified. Best practice would be to make sure that we have tests so that when we try and build this, it would run some tests to verify that everything's working okay. The other script we will have that is not in here by default is a start script. And this will just explain that if no parameters are passed, it will run app.js at the start, just without any additional parameters. The repository, you can see here, it was pre-populated and it has all of our information in there. Perfect. We'll leave that file open, but we'll jump back into the terminal. We want to install another module now. So we want to install Express, which is a more feature-rich web server engine for Node.js. We can use npm again and use install Express. This will go to the internet, find the Express package and download it into our Node folder. You can see on the left-hand side that there is a Node modules folder created and also our package lock.json. And the lock is there to store the exact version of every package that was pulled down. So if a new version came along, the lock file would ensure that everything ran as it did today. And we can go into that in a future session on Node.js. For now, though, you can see that 50 new packages have been pulled down, 51 have been checked, and there are no vulnerabilities, which is good to see. At this stage, we can go back to our package.json, and you will see that a dependency has now been added for us at the bottom of our file, and that's the Express engine. And this syntax is a version of at least 4.17.1, which is the current version that we're running. The folder with Node modules, you can see, contains many dependencies. Most of these have obviously come from Express, and Express itself will have all sorts of information. For now, we don't need to get into the details of that. We can just close the file there. What we can do now is we can update our app.js to use the Express engine instead of the raw HTTP create server. So what we'll do is change up here. We're going to create a variable called Express, and we're going to pull in here the Express module. We no longer need HTTP. We're going to load our web page here rather than static text. So we're going to create another variable here called path so that we can process files in this folder, and we'll call the path module for that. And now we're going to create our application. So let's load the Express module to load our web page. That's as simple as creating a new instance of Express. The host name we can keep, and the port we'll keep. So we'll just have here host and port. Skip over those. And then the rest of this we can just get rid of. All we'll do is we'll keep the log output. That's quite useful to know what port we're running on. So show the host and port when the application runs. There we go. So with our Express application, let's serve our web page. So this time, when we press the dot, we have a whole list of commands that this npm module can handle. So when it calls get, and we pass a path. So in this case, we're just going to pass the default page without any additional parameters. We have the same as before, so the request and the response. We want to return. Now, rather than returning the canned text we had before, this time we're going to do response.send file. And the file we want to pass back is the path. We want to join the current location, which is the current directory, plus, and then we want to give it our web page, which is index.html, which we created earlier. So no matter what you call for, it will always return our index.html web page. Next, we want our application to listen, and it's going to listen on our port, just as it did before. And that's it. So you can see this is also very compact, very small, but a lot more flexible. You can pass different files, start to navigate around a website where the web page returned is potentially in here, multiple files. We won't get into that now. This is just enough to get us started. If we go back to our terminal, let's clear that down. We'll run the same command we ran before. So node app.js. And it looks very similar. Server is running at 0008080. If we go to our browser and press refresh, you can now see it serving our web page that we created earlier on in the course, our hello world with some nice colors and a link. The link takes us to another page. That all appears to be working okay. If we go to our other computer and try, that's refreshed instantly, you can see now that it too renders the web page as we would like it to look. It has the link we can click, also takes us to the website. So now you can see by using NodeJS, we've created a web server on our computer, and that any other computer on that private network can access the website and render the page. If we go into our web page and change something, let's say hello world with Node.js and save, if we refresh, you can see it refreshes instantly. And likewise on the remote computer, also refreshes instantly. So it's returning this live page every time we save, and every time we hit the page, it's loading it fresh. Brilliant. Let's close those. And we can stop our Node.js application from running. Well, we've made some really good progress, and at this point I think it would make sense to save our changes so that if anything happened, we don't lose our work. What we can do here is make some Git commits. Now, as we've been working, you may have noticed on the left this fork icon has picked up a lot of changes, 300 333. That's because the node modules contains a lot of files in there, and we don't really want that many files to be pushed into Git, particularly because they're pulled from the internet, and it's a waste of our resources and could take a long time. So what we can do is bring up the terminal. We want to create a git ignore file, but Windows does not allow you to create files called dot something by default, so we need to use PowerShell with create new item dot git ignore. And we can close that. In the editor, we want to say exclude node modules and then save. When we save that, you will see that the branches goes from 333 files down to 5. And in Visual Studio Code, the color turns grey for this folder, showing it's no longer being tracked by Git. You can also exclude other files. For example, we could exclude the index.html file. That would also go grey. Of course, we don't want to do that. We want to include our file. The package lock.json contains all sorts of versions, and we want to make sure that we commit this lock file along with the rest of the files, so that when we pull this down in future, or if someone else pulls this code down to work on it, they get the exact snapshot of all of the modules that we're running with today. If we didn't commit that lock file when they ran their npm, it might pull down slightly different versions of those modules, which may or may not be compatible. So for now, we'll just exclude the node modules themselves. We can close these. Going back to the Git page, we will add a Git commit message. We will call this our first commit, and we can list what we have done here. So create a basic web page and an Express NodeJS app. Click the tick. We haven't staged them. I always forget that. So click the plus to stage, then the tick. And down by the branch, we can push our changes up. Once those changes have been pushed, we can go to github.com and we can refresh our repository. And now you will see that all of our code is being tracked. That means if we lose our computer or make a mistake and want to revert back at any time, we can change back to this version and we won't lose any of our changes. And there's our lock file as well. But you will notice that the node modules folder hasn't been pushed, and that keeps this repository nice and small, and they will be pulled down using the lock file whenever we do a future commit. Well, that's it for this session, and in the next session we're going to look at using Docker to take all of the things we're doing and take it to the next layer. I'll see you then.